good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We have a couple of technical difficulties that we're going to work out as we begin here. So you'll be able to see Janet, our presenter, shortly. This is Pam Arturi. I'm the Director of Employment Services with Easter Seals Work First for the LA County area and the Orange County Transition Project. And we're really excited to have you with us this morning. This is one of many educational, informational sessions that we will have throughout the year. We're very excited to have our presenter, Janet Stiegley, with us. Janet is a senior consultant with Griffin Hammes, and she has operated her own consulting firm since 1997 called Workable Solutions. And she is also, she is a senior consultant with Griffin Hammes, and she is also a former special education teacher and transition specialist. She is well versed in micro-enterprise development, an expert in optimizing public benefits, and an expert on customized employment. And we're so happy to have her here with us today to present. And Janet, I will let you, just a few housekeeping things. We will probably take a brief break at some point, maybe 5 minutes or so, and towards the end of the presentation, we will open it up for questions, and we will take questions through the chat box. If you have an issue or a question in the meantime, throughout the presentation, I'll keep my eye on the chat box, and we'll take your questions from there as well. Okay? Thank you, Janet.
Okay, well, hello, everybody. And thank you, Pam, for the introduction. You know, and it says on the screen, I'm here because I love to talk about customized employment. And I do. I do. Sometimes too much. I always feel like I over-prepare for these kinds of things. So just know that I'm really flexible. If people have lots of questions and we want to talk about some other things, that's that.
Yeah.
I hear some feedback. Is that Adam?
Oh, yeah, that's Adam. Okay, I'll mute us. Sorry.
Okay. Okay, let me know if you need anybody. So basically what I wanted to talk about today and how to break this up is about, you know, what is customized employment, and then to talk about some first steps in customized employment, a process that we call discovery or discovering personal genius, and then to segue from discovery into customized job development. And so I will be pausing for questions along the way. I know it's always kind of hard, and I think what we'll do, if you type questions in the chat box when we pause, we can get to those. So, and like Pam said, I am a former special ed teacher and transition specialist, so I feel like I'm with my peeps here, and I love what you all do, and you have such a, you know, an opportunity to really change young people's lives as they transition from school to work. So Griffin Hammes, if you're not familiar with it, is a consulting company that focuses on customized employment. We work with a variety of agencies all over the country and some internationally. They might be, you know, state VR agencies or intellectual and developmental disabilities agencies, or local programs, or DD councils, or parent groups, or kind of all over the map, as you can see. So we have done a lot of work with Easter Seals in Southern California. We do a lot of what's called the ACRE training there. ACRE stands for the Association for Community Rehabilitation Educators. So we're in a position to be training a lot of the community rehab program staff that may be serving the folks, the students that you're working with once they exit school. So that just gives you a little bit of overview there. Now, one question I always get is like, okay, well, what's the difference between supported employment and customized employment? So I wanted to start by talking a little bit about supported employment. If you think back to the 80s, when supported employment was getting going, we defined supported employment as real work for real pay in an integrated environment where people without disabilities work, that provided ongoing support. Because, you know, prior to that, people, you know, might have been receiving services in sheltered employment, but we were figuring out a way to move that support that people had in sheltered settings into the community. And it had to have all three of those components to be considered supported employment. So if you think about where those circles interlock, right in here, that little triangle shape, it has to have all three to be considered supported employment. But as people implemented supported employment, what we actually saw was a lot of like group stuff going on. Cleaning crews, large enclaves within industries, that sort of thing, which we got to say, not everybody likes doing the same thing, right? So if you were someone who, maybe you didn't like cleaning, but the only supported employment job was, on the janitorial crew. And God help you if you were good at it, because if you were good at it, you were probably even less likely to be considered for any other employment, because if you're the strong person on the crew, the agency doesn't want to let you go. I see that happen here. I was working with somebody recently who, the gal really loves animals, but she's on this crew that cleans our local airport, and the agency didn't want to have anything to do with thinking about finding her a different job because she basically does the bulk of the work. So what we found, through the years of supported employment, some things that we learned is, first of all, we really need to focus up one person at a time and figure out what each person likes and is interested in, what keeps them motivated. And then, rather than thinking we can train them up and then place them in a job, we figured that doesn't really work very well. I mean, we know we work with lots of folks that don't generalize well. So we need to find that place where their contributions are valued and train them there. And using some good systematic instruction, we know that we can teach people some pretty complex skills. We've also learned that we need to negotiate with employers around tasks that people can do versus trying to fit them into existing job descriptions. Because lots of times we found we're always trying to fit the square peg in the round hole. Somebody might be able to do pieces of the job description, but not necessarily the whole thing. And that we know for long-term support, if we're trying to move away from that crew and enclave and group thing and really individualize for people, that we've got to get really good at systematic instruction and figure out how to use assistive technology and how to engage natural supports to make that happen. Oops, I gotta be very careful when I change slides because it's very sensitive. So here, in a more customized in fashion, we're really looking at people's individual interest and always, always, always considering one person, one job. We're never considering groups. We're never considering, oh, gee, if somebody does this, we could get somebody else in there too. It's always one person, one job. So here you'll see a few people who I've had the pleasure of working with. Up in the left-hand corner is Wayne, who had, some real interest in helping people and really also kind of liked what I'll call, adrenaline or, kind of that rush kind of thing. And so it led us to exploring emergency services and looking into working for places like with the EMTs or with the fire department. The second person here in the middle is Richard, who had a real passion about remote controlled trucks and other vehicles. So with him, we wanted to explore that interest. Or Telena on the right, who had a real passion about baking and figuring out ways that she could use her interests and skills to create a job for herself. So a definition of customized employment, this is from WIOA in 2014. It says customized employment refers to competitive integrated employment for an individual with a significant disability that is based on an individualized determination of strengths, needs, and interests of the individual's significant disability and is designed to meet the specific abilities of the, this gets really redundant, the specific abilities of the individual with the significant disability and the business needs of the employer, and is carried out through flexible strategies. So the things I really wanted to highlight on there, it's based on the person, right? Based on their strengths, needs, interest, but it not only meets their interest, but the business needs of the employer. We'll talk a lot about that as we get into job development. And it's carried out through flexible strategies. We know that we need to think differently about how we create jobs for people. This was an earlier definition of customized employment that I like a little better just because it's a little simpler, and that's kind of how my brain works. So it's individualizing the employment relationship between the employee and employer in ways that meet the needs of both. So we're really focusing on that win-win. It's got to work for the individual job seeker, but it also has to work for the employer, because, you know, and I've found this, I have been able to talk an employer into taking somebody on when they were real. I'll give you an example. This guy named Tony, and I was actually Tony's junior high teacher, and then worked with him through high school and through the transition project. And I talked this business, it was a tofu factory, into taking him in for a work experience that we wanted to turn into a paid job. And they were really nice people, and they liked Tony, but they said from the beginning, we don't really think we have enough for Tony to do. We don't think we have needs that Tony can fill. And I wasn't listening. I was just trying to kind of get him in. And Tony wasn't the kind of guy who wanted to leave without enough to do, because he would find other things to do. So with customized employment, it's not really only about getting the job, but it's about keeping the job. And, you know, you're all working with young people. It's not like they have to keep that job forever and ever. But we want people to keep jobs at least long enough so that they can learn and grow and kind of develop their careers, rather than just kind of spinning back through VR, you know, or through the Department of Rehab again and again, because that's not what anybody needs. Some other differences with kind of from supported employment to customized employment is that with supported employment, we didn't really change the way we went around looking for jobs. And from a more traditional approach, this is kind of how the service system has typically approached it, that we do some kind of evaluation, we help people put together a resume, maybe we practice interviewing, and then look for job postings. Okay, so we might be looking on, you know, Craigslist or through the employment agency or wherever, you know, their job postings might be popping up, and then support people in filling out applications and interviews and that sort of thing. And let me say, there's nothing wrong with that approach. I'm guessing that maybe lots of you have gotten the jobs that way for yourselves, for your kids, for your students you're working with. The problem is with that approach, is generally the question to the employer is who can best fill the job description. And it's a very competitive approach. So if I have an open position and lots of people are applying, I'm going to see, you know, who best matches the job description and probably who brings the less barriers to the job, and it will, if you will. So it's very competitive. And what I see happening over and over in the community is that we're using this kind of approach for people with significant disabilities, and employment specialists spend tons and tons of times helping people fill out applications that never go anywhere. And it's really disheartening for the individual, and it's disheartening for the employment specialist as well. You know, I've been there myself. That's no fun, getting told no over and over. So a customized approach focuses more on what we call really the assessment piece is called discovery, sometimes resulting in a vocational profile. It highly uses social capital, people's social connections and who they know. We've all heard this line, it's not about what you know, it's about who you know, and it's really very true. Having social connections can get you indoors that you need to get through. It focuses more on identifying business needs that maybe they don't even understand they have or have really considered in some ways. It's not just filling the job descriptions. It's really about working with community businesses and talking to people and finding out what kinds of things aren't getting done, what kinds of things would enhance their business, what kinds of things would bring in more customers. And then when we find an opportunity where somebody's skills and interests match some of those identified business needs, to actively present or propose employment to the employer. So we're not waiting for a job to be posted. We're more proactively looking for needs and proposing employment, because now, under this scenario, the question to the employer is, can this one person meet one or more of my identified business needs? And they're not picking them from a pool of people. There's not other people competing. It's totally circumvents that comparative approach. And again, it's not that one approach is good and one approach is bad. It's just apples and oranges. It's different. The definitions from WIOA also talked about using flexible strategies to get at employment outcomes. And I wanted to talk about 4 possible outcomes of customized employment. 2 of those are wage employment options, and 2 of them are self-employment options, which is also a possibility. But under wage employment, we have what we call negotiated jobs and resource ownership. And under self-employment, micro-enterprise, and what we call a business within a business. And I'll show you some examples of each. By negotiated jobs, I think we're probably all fairly familiar with the concept of job carving, or looking at a job description and trying to kind of carve out the pieces that somebody can do, and working with employers on, maybe somebody else picking up those pieces that folks can't do. And that's one way of negotiating a job. But another thing that comes under negotiated jobs is what I'll call job creation, which occurs when you're really going in and working with an employer to identify needs that aren't currently being met. So here's an example. I was working with a young woman named Dawn who was about to leave school. And kind of the things we knew about her is that she really liked organization, and her preference would be to work in a clean, structured environment. So on the spectrum, okay? And she needed to get to work using the bus, which dictated weekdays, because in her community, the bus didn't run on the weekends, and wanting to start with part-time work. So we were looking for kind of office type of work, which of course could happen, happens everywhere, right? There's all kinds of places. But we stumbled upon this place called Ramsell, and it was a business that sold cell phone packages to people. And I was with her employment specialist, and we kind of just wandered in there one day, and we asked if there was somebody we could talk to about employment possibilities there. And who they hooked us up with was the supervisor for the customer service department. And as I'm, my initial thought was, ooh, customer service, Dawn doesn't speak. So when I think about customer service, I think about talking to customers. So that didn't seem like such a match. But the woman was nice, and we decided, we talked to her anyway. And we were asking her lots of questions about what went on there and about what customer service reps do. And primarily what they did was sold phone packages over the phone. So again, I'm thinking, okay, this selling over the phone is certainly not Dawn's forte, given she's nonverbal. But the more we talked to her, we got to questions like, well, gee, is there anything that doesn't get done around here? And right away she said, filing. Filing's a bad word around here. People pay their kids to come in and file. She kind of went on about it a little bit. So later, she's giving us a tour of the room, and we come to this room that is the filing room. And it's a pretty good sized room with big, tall file cabinets. And on top of each file cabinet was about 1.5 feet of paperwork stacked up needing to be filed. And we said, geez, you're not kidding about the filing. What's the deal here? That what it came down to was the customer service reps get paid commission. They get an hourly wage plus commission for sales. And if they're on the phone selling, they're more likely to make commission. If they're back in the file room filing, there's no chance of getting commission. So the filing just wasn't getting done. So about a week later, we went back to Ramsell with a proposal and said, hey, why don't you consider hiring Dawn to file your paperwork. And by the way, it was all filed by phone number, not alphabetically. And she was pretty good at matching numbers. And we said, the benefits to you are this. A, it increases your efficiency because you can find your paperwork when you need it. B, it could save you money because your customer service reps are going to be spending more time on the phone and less time in the filing room. And C, it's going to improve employee morale because obviously your employees don't like to do this anyway. So given that we're proposing employment, say, hey, why don't you hire Dawn 20 hours a week to do this filing task, and this is why, these are the benefits to you, it was kind of a no-brainer to them. It's like, yeah, let's do it. So, and that created her first job, which she worked at for a couple of years. Resource ownership is a second wage employment outcome that it's very much like negotiated jobs with one twist to it. And the twist is that the job seeker brings some resource to the business that allows them to, generate more income or do more business that creates the income so that they can hire the person. Now, here's an example I'll tell you about is Scott. And Scott actually was working for a restaurant part-time, and he really enjoyed his job. And that was his thing, food, culinary stuff. But he wanted more hours, and the restaurant couldn't afford to give him more hours. So when the employment specialist there started talking with the owners about, what might allow them to make more money so that they could pay Scott for more hours, they started talking about how they purchased their desserts from other sources. They didn't do the desserts in-house. And they said, if we created our own desserts in-house, there'd be a much larger markup on those services. And as they got talking about it more, what they really thought would do well is to do ice cream, homemade ice cream there. But it required this machine that cost like $10,000, and at the time they just didn't have the money to put into that. So through some creative strategies, Scott was able to purchase the ice cream machine by the restaurant having that, not having to pay for ice cream outside of town. It allowed them to add more hours for him. And on top of that, they even kind of branded it as Scott's Ice Cream, and it allowed him to kind of do a little self-employment thing on the side. Not only did he get more hours at work, but then they were doing takeout with Scott's Ice Cream. And if you ever go to Minneapolis, Scott's Ice Cream comes up on all the foodie kind of list. It was a pretty cool thing. How they paid for it was a combination of funds. Some of it was vocational rehabilitation funds. Some of it was through a PASS plan. Scott and his mom kicked in a little bit. The employer kicked in a little bit. So it's just a combination. But by purchasing that $10,000 machine, it created this really cool job that he liked, that increased his hours, and it gave him what he wanted to do. So here's another example of somebody who, it was a university department who was sending out all their copying. And that's really annoying. If you need a copy of something, you kind of need it when you need it, right? You don't want to be sending it out all the time. So this woman was able to obtain a very high quality photocopier that created a job for herself within this university department. She worked there 17 years with university pay, university status, great benefits. So it really is, well, it seems a little strange at first. It seems like, wow, it seems like you're just buying a job. But think about it. Lots of us are required to have vehicles for our jobs or college degrees, which are assets that we paid for that allow us to be more marketable. The other two potential outcomes are self-employment outcomes. And first, microenterprise, which is just, when we think about business, think about usually very small businesses. They're generally defined in the U.S. as, being owner-run or, 1 to 5 workers, employees. their micro enterprises are generally operated to support, the person and their family, not to be, grow and hire a lot of people. It's just a way of a very small business. You hear a lot about, micro enterprise and micro lending in third world countries where, the idea is to get people started, so that they can support themselves. So here's the first person, this is Alan, the first person I was involved with helping start a small business. And he had a real interest in working with plants. And we didn't start with the idea of self-employment. It really came through the process of discovery. Some things that we learned about Alan was that he really needed a later morning or afternoon start, not because he was lazy, but because he took some medication that made him super groggy in the morning, and he just wasn't very functional. He also used a wheelchair, so obviously he needed a physically accessible site, and he really preferred working outside. He was always, in the middle of the winter, he'd have shorts on, he always wanted to be out. So we started out like trying him in a large nursery kind of place because it was physically accessible, and he was doing a work experience where he was watering, but it happened early in the morning. That's when they needed that kind of work to happen. So as you can imagine, it didn't work out very well, and we knew that going. That's one of his conditions of employment. So as we whoops, let me go back here. So as we started looking at this, I thought, well, gee, he has a lot of support. He lived in a group home, but it had a giant yard, And we started thinking, well, what about if we got a greenhouse and he grew plants here that he could then take to the and sell at the, well, initially we had him selling at the market. That was stupid because that happens early in the morning too. So it kind of evolved over time, but he ended up selling ground covers, growing and selling ground covers to different businesses around the valley here. So when we talk about self-employment or micro enterprise for people, it's generally not people saying, hey, I want to be a business owner. It's people who just like doing a certain thing. They like producing a certain product or providing a certain service. Artisans, we might call them. This fella, Eric, on the left, he really loved vacuuming. And he just sort of, like he'd say, it kind of gets him in the zone, kind of a Zen thing. And he had a part-time job vacuuming at a hotel, but it wasn't enough. But he was looking for more income, and he really, I didn't think this would work. I didn't think anybody would be able to start a business just offering vacuuming. I kept telling him, you should think about carpet shampooing. He didn't want a carpet shampoo. He wanted to vacuum. And sure enough, he made it happen. It was pretty cool. The second fellow, Matt, with the bright shirt there, loved dogs. He was really, really into dogs. And when he moved to a group home, he couldn't take his dog with him. So he developed this business around dog walking for people. And, it was really pretty cool. The third fellow, that's Poppin' Joe, as he's known. When Joe was younger, if he'd become upset or kind of agitated, his family would always say, oh, come on, Joe, let's go pop some corn. It was just something that he liked to do. Joe now hires about 5 people in his business. His business has grown so much. And those employees provide the support that he needs. He no longer has to depend on services funded through Medicaid waivers because his employees kind of provide what he needs. And Talena over here, last person, she started her business. She actually started a business baking and selling cookies at the farmer's market and wasn't doing very well. Cookies really weren't all that good, and they were certainly not exceptional. And I will say, while I said usually people don't start out as wanting to be business owners, she really does like the idea of being a business owner. So we helped her tweak her business into something more profitable, which was these organic dog treats and animal treats. So those are just some ideas on what can happen there. The last potential outcome is what I'll call a business within a business. And it really is a micro enterprise, but the twist here is that that micro enterprise is operated within another host business. So if you think about when you walk into Best Buy, you might in the corner see the Geek Squad. And so, and I don't know exactly what their financial arrangement is, but think about that. If I go into Best Buy to buy a computer, right away I'm going to need somebody to transfer my data to my new computer. Similarly, if I take my computer into the Geeks to get fixed and they can't repair it, I'm going to be shopping for a new computer, and I'm right there at Best Buy. So think of what what a great cooperative relationship this is for both businesses. And for people with disabilities, there might be some built-in support that is there, that is can be offered through the host business, that might already exist. So here's some examples of business within the businesses that we've seen started, like a small bakery that couldn't afford to provide espresso, and specialty coffees, that this person was able to come in and provide a coffee business within the bakery. Or here's somebody who was really good at car detailing, rather than trying to set up a separate business, to try to hook on to the dealerships, or it could have been a large repair shop or other places where in this case, the person needed help with scheduling. He needed help with, scheduling. He needed help with money. And he needed help with moving the cars because he didn't have a driver's license. So if he were trying to do this on his own, he'd need a whole lot of support. But within the car dealership, those kinds of things were already happening. Somebody was already scheduling. Somebody was already dealing with, billing and invoicing. So, and other people were moving the cars around. So there's just a couple examples there. I'll save on the other ones. They're saving time. But just so you know, when we get to self-employment, self-employment's potentially for anyone, but it's not necessarily for everyone. So some of the things we really look at with self-employment are, first, does it fit the person? Is the task a good fit for them and what they want to do and their conditions of employment? So that's, if you think of a three-leg stool, you have to have all three legs to balance the stool out. It's got to fit the person, but it's also got to be feasible in that it's a business idea that can make profit, because we're not really here to talk about hobby businesses or those kinds of things. That might be fine, but DOR is not going to support that, and we're looking for paid work for people. So it's got to be a feasible business idea. And the third piece, and sometimes I think this is the trickiest part, is that support needs to be available, both in the beginning stages, the planning and launch stages, but also long term. Okay, so that wraps up my first piece on what is customized employment. So this might be a good time to pause for some questions. And Pam, I can't see the question list.
So thank you, Jenna. Everyone is currently muted, so if you do have a question, please type it in the chat box, and then we will read that. Hopefully everyone can see their chat box to the right and type in there, and I will keep an eye out. And Janet, I don't know if you want to share your camera or your screen. I think you'll need to do that yourself.
Came back, let me see.
If you want to.
I don't.
Are there any questions? I'm not seeing anything in the chat box.
Still don't say to share my screen here.
We can see your screen. I just can't see your. We can't see your camera, but.
It's not showing me.
Okay, we have a question. When will the PowerPoint be available? Will the PowerPoint be available to us after the webinar? Yes, we are recording this webinar, and we will be recording our subsequent webinar, so all this content will be available on our website on the page dedicated to the transition project.
Yeah. And there will be a copy of the PowerPoint as well as a copy of what we call the Discovery Staging Record, which is, and that's where we're going to go next, is into discovering personal genius, or this next stage, or first stage in the customized employment process. So you'll have that there too. So I'm going to keep going, but if there's additional questions, just interrupt me, okay?
Okay, I will. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Lori.
So discovering personal genius is Griffin Hammas's version of this more generic process called discovery. And discovery is really kind of the first step in CE, and it's about learning about the person. If we want to find employment that fits who the person is, then we have to know who is the person. And it's a process that we want to result in a very clear narrative about the person that describes both their vocational themes, and by vocational themes, I just mean broad areas to explore based on what we've learned about the person. They're broader than job descriptions. So, for instance, if Talina is interested in baking, a bigger theme might be, food or culinary, with the idea that if somebody has sort of interest in skills in that, around baking, that probably those same skills would be helpful in other culinary environments, right? So it's meant to broaden possibilities. Lots of times we've done the opposite. We've tried to get really specific about, one specific job goal or a dream job. And nothing wrong with dream jobs, but let's face it, sometimes you get somebody that's so locked into one idea, and it's hard to get them thinking about other possibilities. I had this person one time, he wanted to be the ticket taker at the movie theater, and that's it. That's the only job. And, when that didn't pan out, that didn't leave me as the job developer very many options to look for. So we try to get people thinking broadly about themes and to get a few different themes going that can help create ideas and generate possibilities for employment. The other piece of what we're doing in Discovery is figuring out people's ideal conditions of employment. And another way to say that might be, people's conditions for success, like what's going to help them be successful in whatever employment situation we land on, right? And those we all have these conditions for success, and it might be around personal stuff like scheduling or medical appointments or family responsibilities, or it might be around the work or the work environment, specific tasks and activities that people like to do and are good at, or kind of who they work with, or the culture of that environment. Or it might just be other things. I mean, certainly for lots of folks we work with, transportation is going to be a big issue. So, where it's located and how people are going to get there, or any other things that might come up. Sometimes, just even places to avoid because people have allergies or they're sensitive to, the lighting or, something like that. So we're just trying to collect that information in one place. So discovering personal genius is a team process. We bring together certainly the person, the people who are close to them, family members, service providers, people who are supporters and are there for them. It's fast-paced, and I say this kind of chuckle because really discovering personal genius typically takes 6 to 9 weeks, and that doesn't sound very fast. But if the time we spend is really well spent getting to know the person, and it makes job development go faster, it's time well spent. So what we don't want discovery going on and on forever. But even though we know we can keep learning about people forever, but we want to kind of do this in a fast, focused pace so that we can get on to job development. But we also realize that it does take a little time. Well, and lots of times I'll talk to providers and say, well, how many people have you had in job development for more than 6 months? And, everybody's hand goes up in the room. How about how many people have you had that have been job development for a year? Everybody's hand stays up. 2 years, everybody's hand stays up. We don't want that either. We want people getting to job development and moving along. The stages in discovering personal genius are sequential and they're cumulative. So I'll walk you through those stages, but they're meant to build on each other and learn about people as we go. And they're also outcome oriented. We're doing this for the specific reason of finding a job that fits that person. And again, that's one person, one job, and we want it to be something that they're going to stick with, that it's not just something they're going to do for a couple of weeks and quit, but something that they're interested enough to stay with and to be motivated to learn and do a good job. We have a form that guides the process. It's called the Discovery Staging Record, and that'll be available to you too. And just know that the form is meant to do two things. It's to guide the process, but also to capture the information that you're going to be using as you use that into the job development stage. And it's meant to provide a very descriptive picture of the person and what they need through employment. It kind of tells a story. So we want it to be really positive and useful information as we go, because sometimes, information you can collect from people may not be all that positive. So it's kind of our job to flip that into information that's really very useful for a job developer. So again, we want it to be positive. And I don't mean Pollyanna, but I mean taking information that we find and trying to flip it into, well, what does that mean in terms of how he or she could be successful on the job? And also non-judgmental. So think about this. Oftentimes that we see people writing in the staging record is things like, well, Alan enjoys gardening. Well, how do you know Alan enjoys gardening? What we want people to do in the profile is to be as descriptive as possible. Alan showed me his garden and told me that he grows tomatoes. Or maybe Alan's mom said this is what he does. Or you can see from a more generalization side, somebody might say Sherry is good at baking. Well, how do we know Sherry is good at baking? We want people to say specifically what they heard and saw that led them to those conclusions. Oops. So these are the stages of discovering personal genius. There's 5. Call them the home and neighborhood observation, interviewing others, discovery activities, which is really about identifying skills and where people fit, and then verifying vocational themes through informational interviews. And the 5th stage is just kind of wrapping that up in the staging record. So I'll give you some examples here. During stage 1, the home visit, the purpose here is really to start to get to know the person in a comfortable environment where they're typically at their best. I mean, people are typically at their best in places where they're comfortable. And rather than walking in with a checklist and a list of questions, that we want to keep it very conversational. And by the way, during the home visit, you want the person there as well as any other people who might be, maybe live with them, or people that they would like to be there that could share positive information about them. So we keep it conversational. We use a strategy called smooth listening, which is really just not asking a lot of specific questions, but kind of opening up conversation. Things like, tell me about what John does in his free time. Tell me about how John best learns. So we're trying to get people to do most of the talking, and we're really listening and letting them guide the conversation. But of course, there's something called unstructured interviewing. That's kind of probably more technical term, but we're being very conversational, but obviously we want information on certain things. And really what we're trying to get at are things like interests, the skills people have and tasks that they do, how they learn best, and the types of supports that are needed, and also about the people in their lives, like who are important people in their lives, and what do they do, and who are they connected to? Because it is so true that people get jobs through who they know, and we want to use the person and their team members. We want to think about what social connections they have and how those might be useful in job development. So we get through stage 1. Stage 2 is about interviewing other people that perhaps weren't at the home visit, but people that are important or might have important and positive information. People like maybe adult siblings who live away from home, or other family members, or former teachers, or friends, or people like that. Typically this stage, it could be done in person, but typically it's done by the phone. We want people with diverse perspectives here, and people who see the person in a positive light. Like, you wouldn't want me calling the math teacher that flunked you to get information about you, right? Or the employer that fired you. We want to be talking to people who see people's capabilities and have ideas about where to go. This is Daryl, and Daryl lives by himself. And so when we did the home visit, it was primarily staff there, but they knew Daryl really well. They'd known him for a long time. So when we got to stage 2 on interviewing others, we talked to his mom, who lived farther away, and we also talked to a brother who lived in town but wasn't able to be at the home visit. So when we talked to Mom, she told us a lot of things that the staff already knew about Daryl, about his interest, and he loved music and AC/DC and blah blah blah. But one thing that they really learned that they didn't know is that he had done a work experience in school where he did some office work, and he really, really liked that. They'd known he'd worked with children in a school too, and they knew he liked that. But the office work piece was new to him. The other thing that, we talked to his mom about, like, how many hours do you think, Daryl would want to work, or, have the stamina to work? And she said, about 4 to 6 hours. So then we get on the phone with his brother, and we started chatting with the brother. We described like what his mom had said about office tasks, and he right away started talking about his own business. And he, by the way, was an HR person in the oil industry, which, we don't know anything about the oil industry, but he was talking a lot about a lot of tasks that would happen even in his department, about tracking people's certifications and copying flyers and getting them out to people. And when we asked him about the time, he said, Daryl could work 20 or 30 hours a week easily. So you just really do get very different information depending on who you talk to. Stage 3 has to do with doing what I'll call discovery activities. And the purpose of this stage is really get to identify skills that people have, or skills that they could develop over time. So it's also learning about how people learn and how to best support them. And to do that, we like to see people doing activities kind of based on the interest in things that you're already learning about, and doing some activities in different environments, both familiar and unfamiliar environments, but making sure that they have a really active task to work on. So sometimes when I get to this point, I see people saying, well, we're just going to go watch the football game and see if he likes sports. It's like, no. He's got to be actually doing something there, whether he's working at the concession stand or taking tickets or doing something that you can take a picture of. And by the way, we do have people take pictures all through the discovery process, because those can be used to put together some nice portfolios or visual resumes at the end. When I said familiar and unfamiliar environments, based on what people are learning in the first couple stages, they might hear people say like, Joe's really good at mowing the lawn or making popcorn or feeding the animals, whatever. So we might do some observation in those familiar environments, but we might take those out into unfamiliar environments as well, where you might be observing some of the same kinds of tasks, but in a new and different location. There's a couple reasons for that. Kind of seeing how people do in a different setting. Also, you're starting to connect people with folks that share similar interests that might have some really good ideas for you as you proceed. Like if I go to the nature park or to the museum, wherever you're going, to kind of learn from people who have similar interests. So I'm going to kind of pause for a second. I want you to think about this. If you were working with somebody, and maybe you can type in the chat room, so get chats ready. And I can't see it, so Pam's going to have to interpret for me. But take one of these. Somebody who either says, that they're a good artist, or that they love flowers, or they're into remote-controlled trucks. And let's say you don't know what their familiar settings are, but let's say you've done some activities in familiar settings, and now you want to see them do some things in unfamiliar settings. Where might you do that? Like say if it was an artist, where might you see skills in an unfamiliar setting? Or if you pick flowers, where might you see people doing something in your community that might have to do with flowers? So be specific to your community.
So Marcy Day just said the Rose Parade.
The Rose Parade, cool. Very cool.
Great one.
That's the Rose Bowl Parade?
Yeah, that's what I'm assuming, yeah, sure. she says sure. No, that's very creative. I love that. That's awesome.
Super.
Anybody else have an idea? Lori Marino said botanical gardens.
Botanical gardens. Oh, cool. Oh, hi, Lori. That's cool. Okay. So let me show you what some people actually did. Like this is Bryden, who had an interest in art. Not only he liked to draw, he liked to paint, he was into tattoos. There was lots of things indicating kind of an art theme. So his employment specialist set up this activity where they went to, you've already known these kind of sip and paint places, except we didn't get to sip, but we got to paint. So we did some painting, but then she wanted to see if he might have any skills in teaching other people how to paint. So it kind of flipped it around, let him teach too. This woman, her name's Becky, and what people knew that she loved flowers, and there was some things in her chart about that at some point in her life she'd actually had some training in arranging flowers, but nobody really knew anything about it. So we set up an activity with the local florist, and we just said, we'll pay for the flowers, but could she come in and spend an hour with you, and could you help us kind of see what she knows how to do and what she remembers from this more formal training? So that was an unfamiliar discovery activity. This fellow, Richard, who was into the remote-controlled trucks, the first thing we said, we're thinking about familiar environments, like, can we just show us your trucks and what you do with them? And he said, well, I can't because it's broken. So we went, perfect. Maybe we could, as part of the activity, go to the store, buy the parts, see you fix it, and then you can show us what happens. So when we go to the store, it's a big hobby store that has actually this huge section on remote-controlled trucks. While he's shopping around, I kind of started talking to the owner. The owner said, oh, that guy comes in here all the time. He goes, he knows lots more about this than I do. I'd definitely hire him, except I'm trying to sell and close the business right now. So we kind of got that feedback, which was good. And then he got the part, and we could see him repair the the truck, and I mean, look at all the skills going on here. He's balancing the thing on his knee. He's got some kind of charger thing going on. You know, he really knew what he was doing. And then once he fixed it, he started running it up and down the street. And at one point, it tips over, and this neighbor guy is walking by, and the neighbor kind of sits down with him and starts talking with him and about, you know, he's giving him some ideas for how to fix it. And by the end of this conversation, he's wanting to connect Richard with these other folks in the community that are into you know, RC trucks, or, you know, remote controlled trucks too. So while discovery starts at home and in familiar places, and we kind of go from home to familiar activities, and next we're going to unfamiliar activities, and then we're kind of moving from home to community, because really this is about connections and connecting people who have similar themes, who can see where people's contributions are valued because they know those industries, they know those areas. So a lot of this work is about social connections. That moves us into stage 4, which is verifying vocational themes through informational interviews. And you're probably all familiar with the idea of informational interviewing. It's we're going out and talking to employers and you know, owners of businesses and managers of businesses about what it is they do there and seeking their advice. But we're at the same time connecting people again, and letting those people who work in those fields help us figure out where we need to go. Now, I've talked about vocational themes a bit, but here's just you know, kind of a better example. If somebody's really into trucks, a bigger theme might be transportation. So we kind of want to blow it up a little bit. If somebody's really into knitting, a bigger theme might be crafts. If somebody's into tattoos, it might be art. It might be more about alternate lifestyle. So that varies a little bit. But the more you play with that and get people out doing stuff, you can see more what they're really interested in. So I'm going to have you type again. Get your typing ready. If we were thinking about themes and somebody said that they really like or they're really good at picking up litter, what might be a bigger theme?
Oh, Judy just said janitorial work.
Yeah, okay. Other ideas?
Anybody else? What was it, Janet, again?
The picking up litter one?
Picking up litter, okay. Marcy said stadium cleanup.
Stadium cleanup, okay.
Judy said Disneyland.
Okay, so we don't want to get into specific job descriptions or sites, but think in very large terms, like maybe environmental.
Angela said environmental services. Margot just said caring for animals.
Okay, so I would see like environmental as a good big overall theme. Because again, here, we're not looking for job descriptions, because once you say a job description, you sort of get locked into that path. And we want to think more broadly. The purpose of themes is to help think more divergently about different possibilities. So if I say environmental services, that could take me in a lot of different places, right? It might take me to like think about like water cleanup, or places that deal with clean air, and not just picking up the litter, but you know, lots of different possibilities. If I were to say baseball caps, what's kind of a bigger, broader?
Just going back to the picking up litter. Someone said arts and crafts. Margot said arts and crafts. Marcy said upcycling.
Ooh, upcycling, I like that. Yeah. So again, just thinking about broad areas, try to avoid job descriptions. So if I say baseball caps, what's that make you think of?
Baseball caps.
Mm-hmm. If somebody likes baseball caps, but you're looking for a broader, big, broad area to explore, or maybe let's start with a different one. If
Lori said apparel.
Apparel, good, good. So that, I mean, if somebody likes baseball caps, they might like a lot of different, they might have the same kind of skills that would be with lots of different apparel. So apparel, even if you wanted to get it more around the sports, it could be sportswear. What about kittens? What's a broader theme for kittens?
Anybody want to take a stab at it? A broader theme for kittens.
Because you start thinking, what do you do with kittens? You pet kittens, you feed kittens.
Lori suggested animals. Amanda suggested veterinary services.
Yeah, I would see animals as the broader theme because veterinary services kind of starts getting you more into a job description. So if we want to think broadly, and here I'll show you a list of common themes. I probably should have showed you this first, just to give you a better sense. We're looking for pretty broad areas, right? Again, the reason is not wanting to get too locked into a specific job, but it's broad areas that we're going to be exploring in the community. So, and again, these are just kind of a guide for the job developer. So we're not telling them a specific job. In the old days, we used to really get locked into that dream job idea. But think about it. Sometimes, if people ask me what my dream job was, it'd be to play the piano in front of a group of people that were all singing, like at a piano bar or something like that. And that would be my dream job. But there's a little problem with that. You know what it is? I don't play the piano, or not very well, certainly not well enough to play in front of people. So sometimes people's dream jobs, it's about things that they don't really have the skills to do. So that's part of it. The other thing is it kind of assumes people are one-dimensional. If they didn't get that dream job, and all of us, we probably like what we do, but if we didn't do what we're doing right now, can you think of some other things you'd like to do? Like I might have gone probably more into the medical field if I hadn't gone in this direction, and I probably would be happy there too. So it's, assuming that people have, that they may not have the skills for the dream job, that people are multi-dimensional to begin with. And there was one more point I was going to make there. It just flew out of my head. That dream jobs change over time. At one time in my career, my dream job was to become a special ed teacher. That's what I wanted to do. And once I became a special ed teacher, I wanted to be the transition specialist. And, once I became the transition specialist, then I wanted to do something different. So dream jobs change as we go, and that's probably a good thing. So let me flip here for a second. So we started stage 4 talking about doing informational interviews in the community, and we want to set those up in places where people share similar themes, right? If I'm into animals, I want to go explore opportunities in my community where there's potential to work with animals, and it might take me to some of those places you mentioned, the veterinary services or other places. But when I go, I want to be talking to the manager, or the owners or managers of those businesses. And one of the things One of the things I always say to people is try to avoid the big box stores. And I'll tell you why, is that if you go to a big box store, who you're going to get to talk to is the HR person. And they're not necessarily there because they share that theme. They're there because they're into HR kind of stuff, right? That's what they do. So if we look for smaller businesses to approach, the better our chances of actually getting to talk to the owner or manager who are there because they share those themes. And before going, I try to prep job seekers about questions we might ask. And it's not that this is about teaching the job seeker to do the interview. It's not. But we want the job seeker there if possible and to be as involved as they can be. So I think about the questions to ask in 3 different categories. I think about questions to open the discussion, and questions to get advice, and questions to get at employer needs. So by the first category, opening the discussion, I might just say things like, oh, tell me how you got started in this field, or, tell me about what your business does, or, tell me what a typical day looks. It's mostly about just getting people talking and comfortable and learning a little bit about the business. I also try to get at questions that will get at advice. So, tell me about the different tasks that happen here, or tell me what you're looking for in potential employees, or, questions about skills or training requirements. But I almost always end an informational interview with a question that's pretty specifically says, what would you recommend to John here who's interested in working in the transportation field? If John's sitting right there, they know who John, they're seeing who John is, they're seeing somebody young who's starting, and can kind of give advice and support. And maybe it's not within their company, but maybe it's, I think you should go talk to so-and-so, or, and then when they say that, they can say, oh, great, can we tell them you sent me? That sort of thing. The third thing we're looking for, and the third set of questions here, are really geared around identifying employer needs. So questions like, what are new trends in the field? Or what are things that customers call and ask for or complain about that the business can't provide? Like the example I, gave you with the filing, it's like, what's not getting done around here? This is an interesting way to phrase the question, but if you had $10,000 to invest in your business, what would you do with it? Now, if you ask that to, if you ask that to Walmart, they'd say, that's a drop in the bucket for us, or any big store. But for a small business, you get some really interesting responses out there, which could create some ideas around resource ownership and how that person might, how we can really, really make this a win-win situation for the person and the business. Another way to kind of phrase that is, if you had an additional employee X number of hours per week, what would you have them do? And you could fill in, 10 hours, 20 hours, 30 hours. What would you have them do? I was one time working with this woman. She had a mental health disability, and some interests that were coming up is she liked to work with older people, and she liked crafts, and she was very interested in making gift baskets. And so I was working with her employment specialist, and we went to an assisted living place, and we're talking to them about, kind of the jobs that happen there and things that happen. And we're sitting in the office, and at one point we said this question, what would you do if you had an additional employee 10 hours a week? And she said, oh, that's weird you asked that. We were just saying the other day, wouldn't it be great to have somebody come in between 4 and 6, which is a busy time here. People are coming home from activities, and we're getting ready for dinner. And she goes, but who would want to work 10 hours a week? Or who would want to work 2 hours a day is really what she was saying. And actually, that was like the perfect schedule for this person, short hours, but every day. And while she's saying this, I'm looking above her head, and up on the top of the file cabinets are these gift baskets that they give to new residents moving into the assisted living place. And they had like a phone book and a coffee cup and, some stuff like that in it. So we were able to negotiate a job for this woman just based on this informational interview. The last stage in discovering personal genius before we shift to job development is just summarizing what you've learned through discovery. So it's meant to be a very descriptive narrative that pulls together the 3 vocational themes and the person's ideal conditions for employment. And we want that to be in very positive and useful information. So here's an example where during discovery, what I started out hearing from people, in primarily this was coming from the teachers. This was a transition age student. Was that, and they were saying it as nicely as they could, but you could tell they were kind of ready for this guy to go, to graduate. So that he was non-compliant, that he'd say no to any request, that he was disrespectful of authority figures, and that he had poor hygiene. And I'm the job developer that VR is contracting with to help find him a job. And I'm thinking, well, I guess I got my work cut out for me here. Who's going to hire this guy that says no to everything? But during discovery, one thing that came out, it really came from his mom. She just kind of mentioned at one point that he's kind of a litter bug. And I said, litter bug? What? Tell me about that. And she said, well, he'll just go down to the local Dairy Queen and he'll pick up the parking lot. I said, oh, do they pay him for that? No, he just, once in a while they'll give him an ice cream cone. He just really likes to do that. And it so shifted my thinking about Shane. And by the way, by litter bugs usually litter. What she really meant is that he picks up litter, which is a better thing. But it shifted my thinking about how to frame that. Instead of saying he's non-compliant, is he works best independently, or he works best without excessive direction. He works best outdoors doing physical work where it doesn't matter so much if your hygiene isn't great. And looking at it that way, then I could see all different possibilities for this fellow. Okay, so Shane is a 21-year-old job seeker who enjoys working outside, doing physical work that helps to maintain or improve the environment. Okay, that's a theme getting in there. He works best on his own without excessive direction from supervisors or coworkers. He needs to understand the tasks so that he can work independently and control the schedule and completion of duties. Now, looking at it that way, I could see some possibilities. And I'll tell you, this was screaming self-employment to me. But we'll come back to Shane later and what happened with him. I think let's take a pause. Let's see if there's any questions. And maybe people might want a quick little 5-minute break. Run, fill up your coffee cup, run to the restroom. Would this be a good time to do that? And maybe questions can come in while we're on break, and then we'll come back in 5 minutes. How's that sound?
That's a great idea. So we're at 11. We're at 11:15 now. So we'll take a 5-minute break to 11:20. And in the meantime, if you have questions, please put them in the chat box, and then we'll get to them when we return.
Okay. And thanks for hanging in there, guys. I know it's a lot of me talking, so take a break. Be right back. Hey, I fixed it.
Oh, good.
I
Hello. Hello. Can you, now you see the box at the bottom? Are you able to shift that box over or no? That's just going to stay
Now I
there.
am. I couldn't move it before, but now I can move it around.
Okay. Yeah, Adam came in here, but I didn't want to interrupt you. So, but there we go. Debbie was thinking she could change things remotely, but we weren't able to do it.
Well, at least I get to say hi.
Hello. If people are listening, I put in the chat box the link to our project webpage. You can access the Transition Project page on our Easter Seals SoCal website. It is a separate page under our programs, under Employment Services. And we have a whole host of wonderful resources there, tools, videos, links to other agencies and resources as well. And as we record our webinars and have our PowerPoints, we will load those up there for you, as well as the schedule for the year that should be finalized this week. And I'll do a little plug for our March webinar, which we will have 3 financial literacy webinars coming up, and the first one in March is titled How Youth Can Go to Work, Keep SSI, Other Benefits, and Live to Tell About It. So that's our March webinar. So just keep an eye out for that. I'll be sending that out probably this week, the information on that in the calendar. And I also put in the chat box the link to register for the upcoming ACRE course in April and May, the course that Janet is teaching for customized employment. So if anyone still is interested in that and wants to register, you can go directly to that link and do that there. Should we get started again, Janet?
Okay, thanks, Kim.
Sure.
Welcome back. Now you can see me. Hi. So we left off on wrapping up the discovery staging record and wrapping up discovery. Were there any questions in the chat box before I go on? Pam?
Oh, sorry, I was muted. No questions in the chat box.
Okay. All right. So next question then is, okay, you've finished discovery, you've gotten to know the person, you've gotten to know, what's a really good fit for that person. So then what we do is move into the career plan, or what we might call the list of 20. And to do that, as we do that, it's a great time to pull the team back together, including, family members, VR counselors, whoever's on that person's team, to help you with this piece, because it's a great time to review what was learned in discovery and use them to help you brainstorm ideas, or to help the employment specialist brainstorm ideas about where they might go, given those 3 themes and given that person's community. You also want to pull the team together because you want to focus on their social capital as well as the person's. So, we're hoping that people have connections to some of the businesses we identify, because that creates a nice warm intro into it. And also at that planning meeting, you want to determine some first steps in job development. So a list of 20 looks like this. Let's say for this person, there are 3 themes we identified were horticulture, animals, and crafts/textiles. So thinking about that specific community, where might be places where people with similar themes would work? And it's just creating a list. We try in this section to give some variation. So let's say, like, if somebody had a culinary theme, we don't want to just list 20 restaurants. But, thinking broadly about the food industry, maybe some restaurants, some grocery stores, some food manufacturers, some caterers, different kinds of places. And you'll see here, I'm listing, places specific to this person's community. Now, this one's not completed. We want to get clear to 20 on each list. So really it's a list of 60 because you've got 3 themes. The reason being is that, the first 5 are always pretty easy. The first 10 are really pretty easy. But when you start getting past 10, people have to start stretching a little more. And when you get to the 15 to 20, now you're starting to have to get really creative about, where are their possibilities, particularly given, you might have some people in smaller communities, and particularly given that we're trying to avoid some of those big box stores too. I mean, you'll see there's a few on here, but we're really trying to get at some of those more, smaller artisanal businesses. When you get to those last ones, you'll really see that people start to think outside the box. Sometimes what's helpful too is thinking about cross themes. Like if I were to think about animals and crafts, and cross those themes together, what might I come up with? Maybe I'd come up with, spinning wool or things like that. Or if I cross horticulture with crafts, what might I come up with? Maybe things that deal with paper making. It might take me to the Children's Science Museum in town, or things like that. So just know this is meant to be creative. It's meant to be a brainstorm. It's meant to, get ideas up there. But also while you're doing this, be asking the question like, wow, Paws and Suds, that sounds interesting. Does anybody know anybody that works there? Or does anybody know anybody that knows anybody? Because again, when you go to approach these places, which the job developer is going to be doing now, they're going to be using this list to kind of prioritize some places to go visit. If somebody knows somebody there and they can start that contact with, hello, Paws and Suds, my name's Janet and I'm working with, a man named Brian who's really interested in working with animals. And Julie, your neighbor, suggested that I call you. If you start with that kind of warm introductions, it's more likely that you're going to be able to get in for an interview easily with people being a little more open-minded. So the list of 20, again, it's 20 businesses for each theme. Then you're going to prioritize those lists so that in job development, you're continuing to conduct informational interviews and using what you learn at each one to take you to the next place. I mean, you're going to keep coming back to this list of 20, but you'll also find as you start talking to people in the industries, they're going to guide you maybe in some slightly different directions, which is a cool thing. So that kind of wraps up, we've moved now from discovery into job development. And sometimes it's a little confusing because we are doing informational interviews as part of discovery, but we keep using them in job development. It sometimes is a little fuzzy where discovery ends and job development starts. So just know there's kind of this gray area here in the middle where you're probably doing some informational interviews to wrap up discovery and finalize themes. You might be doing some additional discovery activities or maybe even some more formal work trials during that phase. You might even get some unsolicited employment offers, which happens. It's quite often, actually. I mean, people can kind of see, wow, this sort of makes sense, and it makes sense why this person is here, and we can see how we could benefit from them being here. So, but once you've actually completed the narrative and completed the list of 20, I'd say you're in formal job development now. So some key strategies that we use in job development are, first of all, and this is just kind of an attitudinal thing, that we've got to assume that employers are always hiring. Think about that. Employers are always hiring. They're always hiring if we can show them how this person can add value to their business. And that typically results in, often results in, making more money or increasing efficiency or saving money, or having better relations with customers, or things like that. We've got to start with that sort of headset. In fact, ODEP, the Office of Disability Employment Policy, spent a lot of money and a big research study figuring out, what were kind of the critical things about job developers that helped them, that helped them be successful. The number one thing was a positive and open approach to life. So we need people to really have that open mindset that employers are always hiring if we propose something to them that makes sense. Avoiding the big box stores. We talked about that already. And I think you all know what I mean by big stock stores. The Walmarts, the Targets, the Home Depots. We tend to go there a lot because they're big and there's lots of jobs there. But what we find time and time again is job developers will spend, months and months and months going back to the same big box store, probably because there's a nice HR person or a nice manager there that will kind of give you the idea that they're trying, that they're working on it, and they probably are, But what always happens is it has to go to corporate. And if you hear those words, we're waiting to hear from corporate, trust me, you'll be waiting a long time. And I've seen this happen again and again. I had this gal who loved babies, and the employment specialist had a nice connection with a manager at Babies R Us. And he really, I think, wanted to hire her and wanted to get her in, but it just couldn't go through the corporate loopholes. So if you have good relationships with those places and it's working, I'm not saying that's a bad thing necessarily. I just wouldn't spend a lot of time there if it's not going anywhere. Rather, to focus on more artisanal businesses that are smaller, that don't have job descriptions, or maybe not very formal job descriptions. There's probably not an HR department. There's no online application. With smaller businesses, you can go in and really talk to the business owners. And it's really, again, about personal connections and people sharing those personal connections and seeing value in what people can bring. So that's what we're trying to get at. And as we can go through job development, we're continuing to use informational interviews as a strategy to continue learning about the business and about the opportunities in the industry that might be there. Again, continuing to use social capital. So what I want to focus here, this last part on, is really creating value for the employer. Because again, it's that win-win that defines customized employment. So we have to create value for employers, and a couple of ways we do that. I mean, we talked about resource ownership, which is certainly one way to do that. But really, it's usually about really listening to employers and listening to what their needs are and proposing employment that helps address their needs. So as we're doing job development, often what we're trying to do is finding the jobs behind the jobs. Because every place we walk in, there's sort of the obvious jobs. If you walk into a grocery store, the people that you see mostly are the checkers, right? So those are kind of maybe the beggars, or, maybe somebody's doing the parking lot. Those are the people we see. But there's a whole bunch of jobs that happen kind of behind the closed doors, behind the doors that say for employees only. And, there might be lots of stuff that goes back there. There might be, receiving and the bakery, or the meat department, or the HR department, the office kinds of things of it. All kinds of stuff that happens back there that we don't really see. And that's what we're trying to get at. What are the things that aren't so obvious? There's this woman, her employment schedule. What we knew about her is that, and she was really pretty blunt about this, I want a simple job, right? I want a simple, clean job. I want to know what I'm doing. I don't want to stretch myself. It was kind of what she'd been telling us. And it seemed like office work was, or certainly she wanted to do something inside, and we were kind of looking at office work types of possibilities. And the employment specialist went and talked to a CPA in her town. And when she was trying to get at needs that the CPA might have, and the woman was saying, no, we really, we kind of got everything handled. We don't really have any needs. And the employment specialist said to her, she said, well, what are those shoe boxes up there on the shelf? And the woman said, oh, well, actually, they're full of receipts that people bring me to do their taxes. She says, you wouldn't believe it. They just bring me this whole bag of receipts. I just throw them in those boxes until I get around to organizing them. And it made her think, like, wow, is this person, you're talking about, could she possibly be organize these receipts? Because that really would be helpful for me. It would save me a lot of time. And it's, it's kind of a tedious task, really. So we tried her out. We tried Patty to see if it's a little trickier than it looks initially, because all receipts look different. The dates are in different places, and some are written out, some are numbers. The totals on receipts come in different places. But we tried her out on it, and she did really well. She was able to do it. And one thing Patty had told us initially, she didn't want to do anything with computers. That was kind of too newfangled for her. But when we really got there and, we're trying it out, we said, hey, Patty, if, you kind of organize these receipts, would you like to kind of try entering them on the spreadsheet? And she did great with it. And then once we identified that need, then the employer started saying things, well, hey, do you think she could help me with bank runs? Or do you think she could help me with mail runs? So she started thinking of a lot of other tasks that would be really helpful for her to do. So it created a whole position for Patty just based on this informational interview and identifying a need. Whoopsie. Go back. This is Wayne, and through discovery, Wayne was not very verbal, and it was kind of hard to get information out of him about interests. And the employment specialist was great. She knew he really liked movies, and he had this whole collection of movies. And so one day she said to him, Wayne, pull out 10 of your favorite movies and let's talk about them. And she was asking him why he liked these movies, and a whole bunch of things came out. Like he liked animals, he liked helping people, he liked hot chicks, But one of the things that really was a thing is that he liked, kind of the adrenaline, the rush kind of thing that kept coming up. So as we started looking at jobs for him, we were thinking about that he liked to help people, and he liked that, adrenaline kind of thing. So we started exploring emergency services, and we went and did informational interviews with the EMTs, and this was at the fire department. And as we got talking to the fire department about needs, there was all kinds of things that happened, like rolling up the hoses when they came back from fire drills. There was a lot of just kind of general organizing and straightening, which Wayne was very good at. And so he was hired by the fire department to do, a list of tasks. We identified the needs, and he just, what his employer, John, says, the fire chief, is that he's here for the same reasons we're all here. We all like helping people, and we all get a kick out of the adrenaline. And Wayne was in the same boat, and they worked with him beautifully on. He had to actually learn to get his uniform on within 1 minute to be able, to go out on fires with them. And he does. He goes out he doesn't go into burning buildings, but he helps hold signs and get people things that they need. So, but it took him 5 minutes to get that on initially. And 5 minutes looks really slow, but he got it down to 1 minute. And through the process, in the first, probably a year or so that he worked there, he lost 80 pounds, really improved his health. So, customized employment, then, the themes kind of allow us to look at a whole possibility of jobs. Some of them may be unknown or seen by the public. It helps connect employers and job seekers around similar themes and interests. And it helps make that match between people's personal contributions and the needs of the workplace. But we always have to remember that wages are the residue of profit. If employers aren't making a profit, they're not hiring people because they can't afford to. So if we really do take this win-win notion on how we can help employers make more profit, it helps us in our work. This was something that came, not from the disability field, but from headhunters, people looking for jobs, that who don't have disabilities. So the headhunter's advice was, stop presenting yourself as a candidate, stop acting like an applicant, and instead start acting like a solution provider. Start acting more like a consultant, a problem solver. And I see that really as the role of the employment specialist. We're there, sure, to help people with disabilities find jobs, but we also have to help businesses think about what would really help them to make that win-win for everybody. This is something that comes from a book called The Art of Sales, and I love this. Excuse me, let me read it to you. It says, what is the economic value of adding an elevator? How does an elevator change the way you price the different floors on a building? In a building without an elevator, the ground floor would be the most valuable, as it would be the easiest to reach. The top floor would be the cheapest. Add an elevator and what happens? Now you can call the top floor the penthouse and charge in rent many times what you charge for the ground floor. So what's the product you're selling here? Is it the elevator? No, it's the view. What an elevator does is uncover the value of an asset contained in a very tall building, the view. You can extract the value of the view via the penthouse, via the elevator. The building owner doesn't care if his tenants get tired going up and down the stairs. He cares about the value of his property. Before the salesman came in, no one had thought to charge for the view. The salesman thinks of all this, not the elevator maker or the building owner who is already collecting his rents. The salesman envisions and creates value where previously there was none. Because he is by nature an optimist, he can make the best of everything. So again, in our role in helping create jobs for people, we have to help employers understand what could potentially create value for them and help them see through employment proposals how we can do that. So resource ownership is one way to create value, but there's lots of other ways too. And really, it's not even creating value, but helping people see that value. And we do that through employment proposals. So a proposal, now, and this can be done verbally, it can be done in writing, but once you find you've gotten to know the person through discovery, and then you've explored community needs through informational interviews, and all of a sudden now you find a match, right? That this person's contributions match their needs. You just got to put it out there on the table. Will you consider hiring this person to do this? And this is why. So the kind of format I use, and again, if it feels more comfortable to do this verbally and not in writing, what I typically would do is propose something verbally, but have it in writing as a backup in case somebody has to go share it, even in Ma and Pa stores. Ma has to check with Pa, Pa has to check with Ma, whatever. So I'm saying, I'm going to propose that you hire this person, X number of hours a week to do these tasks. This is how it benefits you. This is a little bit about the potential employee and why we're coming here. These are the themes that they have, some of the skills, contributions, maybe personal attributes that we think would benefit your business. If there's any conditions, like things like accommodations or things needed, we can lay that out. Any proposed financial arrangements, and then next steps. So here's, let's go back to Sean here. I think I call him Shane in the other picture. But remember, he's the guy that was the litter bug, right? And we knew we were looking for a job that would allow him to work independently, would have a flexible schedule, without excessive need for direction, and would be outside and active. And so I'm initially thinking self-employment because he was already picking up the parking lot at the Dairy Queen. I thought, well, we could add on some more stores. Maybe we can, kind of put this together into a business. But he moved right then to a new community. It was a very small community. and there weren't a lot of big parking lots. So I was kind of scrambling, trying to think of opportunities. And at one point I went and talked to the city maintenance people because I had seen there was a city park, there was a boat ramp and a sports park, all that get a lot of litter. So I talked to the guy there, and basically what he said is that they had crews, both from corrections and youth crews in the summertime, that did most of that pickup work, and that if I could get Shane on a work crew, that would be fine. But look at this. Look at his conditions of employment. Do you think a crew would work for him? No, I don't think so. Crews work together. They don't work independently. The schedule's not flexible. There's a supervisor. It just wasn't going to work. So I went back to the drawing board and I started exploring the community more. And I went to the library or the post office one day. I was looking at the post. It's a pretty small parking lot at the post office, but there was a sign in the window that had the city's mission statement posted. And one of the goals it listed on there was that it said something like this, that the city will involve youth in maintaining the city, or something like that. And I thought, wow, I wish I would have known that when I talked to the guy from the city, because that could have been good, negotiating material, a good bargaining chip. So that happened, and then I went home that night, and I'm reading the paper. This was in my local community, and I'm reading the paper that this man I'd been negotiating with at the city had gone to jail on parole violation. So now I had some new ammunition, and I knew I was going to have somebody new to negotiate with. So sure enough, I went back and talked to the new guy who was filling in, and I kind of explained what was going on here, that this is what Shane's about, and I'm looking for work for him in this community, and I think that he could really help the city by being a on-call person to help with picking up litter in the city park, the sports park, and the boat ramp. And I described Sean as I'm kind of talking about him now. One of the things it also said in the city mission statement is described residents of the city as independent spirits, which Sean certainly was. So I said, Sean's an independent spirit who's very interested in the environment and maintaining his community, and I'm proposing this on-call assistant job for cleaning up those 3 areas. And the guy said to me, the new guy, he said, "Oh, you mean that new kid in town?" I said, "Yeah." And I thought, he's already blown something. Or he goes, "No," he goes, "It's interesting. He came up to me the other day and he told me that there was a mess in the park, and I didn't really pay attention to him, but sure enough, as I'm driving home from work that night, I drive by the park and there's garbage all over, and I had to spend an hour and a half cleaning it up by myself at supervisor's pay, overtime." So as soon as I hear this, I go back with a written proposal that said something like this. Okay, I'm proposing that you hire Sean as part-time on-call assistant to clean up these areas, and these are the benefits to the city. A, it provides additional help at peak times and seasons. It saves money by preventing paying overtime, which we just had a good example of, and it's consistent with the city mission. Now, I don't know if any of you have actually done job development, but sometimes, cities and any government agencies they're kind of like big box stores. They're really hard to negotiate with. But when we put this in writing, and of course they had to take it to the city council, but when they could see the benefits of it, it then became a no-brainer. It's like, yes, we need to do this. This makes some sense. And you know what? For Sean, once he got working with the city and they got him a cool, vest, and I said like he was disrespectful of authority figure. He's disrespectful of teachers. He liked this guy that worked for the city, who he shared similar themes with, right? That guy was cool. So it worked out great, and really all the things that we were worried about being problems weren't really problems in that setting that fit him. So it's really what customized employment is about, is finding finding those things that really fit that person and also fit that business need, or in the case of self-employment, community need. So it's a set of tools and strategies that can ensure people are successful. And remember, it uses discovery instead of those more traditional vocational evaluation approaches. And it also uses, it's really about talking to employers and finding out their needs and not just putting in applications, okay? So got to get out of that mindset. And it is about understanding like who that person is right now. So we've got about 10 minutes for questions. As questions might be coming up, I wanted to alert you to there's a couple of resources that we have available. One's called the Job Developer's Handbook, which is on customized employment, and then this other book, Making Self-Employment Work, which is more focused on the customized self-employment. I wanted to show you those, as well as, here, I'm going to see if I can get out of this. Okay, I put that on there, but I was trying to show, here we go. There is a flyer out. We are going to be doing the ACRE training again. ACRE stands for the Association of Community Rehabilitation Educators. It is a 40-hour certificate training on customized employment, and we're going to be doing that in Irvine, California, and it's 5 days, but it's split 2 days, 3 days. So it's April 21st and 22nd, and then the remaining 3 days is May 19th through 21st. And I'm the instructor for this one. We have some different staff doing them periodically, but I've done several of them, and we'll be there this spring. And we hope that you can join us for that. And let's just take any questions then. People, I think you can unmute yourselves if you just want to talk, or you can type into the chat box. And I'm thinking maybe there might be questions specifically around schools and how people use this in a school setting. So if they're coming up, let me just say this. As a former transition specialist, I know people are busy, right? People are busy. And I think what a lot of schools do is set up sort of pre-established work sites and rotate people through them. And when I think, and that's pretty much what I did, right? And when I think back to that, pretty much all of those sites probably were janitorial in the sense. They might have been, different kinds of plants. This might have been a kitchen, but really what people were doing were janitorial work. It just seemed like everything was janitorial. So if you get somebody that's not good at janitorial or doesn't like janitorial, that's not, customized employment is really about setting up those experiences based on what you're learning about people. And I know that gets tricky when you've got lots of kids to serve, and it's hard to be as individualized. And sometimes those work experience sites when kids are younger might help them and help you see what people like and what people maybe don't like. That at some point, and especially as they get older and closer to leaving school and going to adult services, that you're really going to want to be targeting some sites specifically around them and around what the kinds of jobs that you think are going to work for them long term. And that's where I think the pre-ET stuff can really help you by getting BR and the Department of Rehab to come in and help with that. So hope that provides a little food for thought there. Right? That's how discovery can be done in school. Questions?
Feel free to type in the chat box or unmute yourself if you have a question. We have a few minutes.
I'm just thinking of some other thoughts that...
Oh, here we go. There's one in the chat box from Lori. When dealing with mom and pop businesses, money can be tight. Do you find that typically they are able to find the money to hire individuals? And do you ever use paid internships as a way to help get someone started?
Yeah. That certainly is an issue with smaller businesses, is that, you know, and I'm a small business owner myself, and I got to tell you, I've been in business, 22 years or something like that. I've hired 2 people in that whole time, and both of them proposed employment to me. And the first time that it happened, the woman said to me, you know, she said, Janet, I like what you do, and I think I could help you, and I think these are the skills I bring to it. And I told her no initially, not because I didn't think she could help me, but I didn't think I could afford it, and I didn't think I could figure out how to do the paperwork to employ somebody, and or it just sounded like too much to figure out. And I told her no. And I brewed on it for a couple months, and I called her back and I said, yeah, what? Come on, let's try this. So I think, again, it's making that case that they can be of value, that there is some value there. And if it is purely money, again, you're looking at how can we help that business increase revenue? Are there ways through resource ownership, or even through a business within a business? I was up in northern Canada one time talking to this guy in an auto parts store, and he was kind of this tough Canadian guy, and he and his daughter ran the store, and they clearly liked to do things their way and didn't want to consider employees and blah blah blah. But we talked to him about the idea of this guy who liked remote controlled trucks, maybe doing some kind of business within his auto parts store, and he loved that idea. He thought it was really creative. He could see how it could bring more business to his business. So sometimes it's just talking through some options with people. But resource ownership is a weird thing to talk about, like if you're first meeting people. I mean, you kind of got to get to know them a little bit and know the situation, and know that they're really trying to work with you and not just like get some free equipment or that kind of thing. So that's one way. I think internships too can be a great way to get in the door, like the PIPs that you guys have available, but I'd use them really strategically. Like if it's really clear that this business is never, ever, ever going to hire somebody, they're only willing to be a work experience site, I think I'd pass on that. I'd save that more for the employer who's really wanting to work with this person and just trying to figure out how to bring them on. I'll give you an example. I worked with a woman who was really trying to break into the school district in her community because there was lots of different, she had customers who were interested in working with kids. She had customers that were interested in working with sports. She had folks who were interested in office work, and schools kind of had all of those things. But again, they're hard to break into because there's the HR department and there's the budget, and the budget, gets done well in advance. So what we figured out is they were open and willing to hiring people. They just didn't have the money in that budget cycle. And if we could get them to the next budget cycle, they'd be okay. So we used the paid internship kind of idea just to get them in the door and get them through till the next budget cycle so people could figure out how to get it into the budget. So those might be some ideas to think about for sure. Other questions?
Anyone else?
Or people want to share anything that they're doing around customized employment? There's some customized employment going on down there, so. Okay, so Pam, can people get copies of the PowerPoint and the Discovery Staging Record?
Yes, we'll be posting everything on the project website, and I believe we already have a copy of the Discovery Staging Record on the project website as a tool, but we'll make sure that we have it there as well as the PowerPoint and any other materials.
Okay. Well, thank you all for joining today, and I hope you got some useful ideas. And remember, we're doing the acre training April, May down there, so I hope to see you there.
Great. Thanks, everybody.
So, bye-bye.
Thanks, Janet.
Welcome.